Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Billy Wilder Theater, or should I say, ciao, ciao, bienvenuto. I'm Claudia Bester. I'm the Director of Public Programs here, and I'm really delighted to welcome you to tonight's screening of the new film, Taking Venice. The film just came out in theaters in New York last week, and tonight is its Los Angeles premiere. And tomorrow, yeah, right on LA. Tomorrow, Friday, it'll begin screening in West Coast theaters, including the Laemmle Royal in Santa Monica and the Laemmle Town Center in Encino. So if you enjoy the film tonight, and I'm sure you will, please tell all your friends, because you know that opening weekend box office is really critical to independent cinema. I'm really pleased to say that the director of the film, Amei Wallach, is here with us tonight. And after the screening, she'll have a post-screening conversation with art historian Rani Singh and take some audience questions. So you might want to think about questions while you're watching the film. It's a real art history thriller set in one of the most beautiful cities on the planet, if not the most beautiful. So I know you're going to love it. Afterwards, the bar at Lulu in the courtyard should still be open, so you might want to head out there for an Italian aperitivo after the screening. I just got back from the Venice Biennale last week, and I have to tell you, the aperitivo is de rigueur, so I strongly encourage. Now, please enjoy Taking Venice. So now I'm delighted to introduce our wonderful guests for tonight, Amei Wallach and Rani Singh. Amei Wallach is the director of Taking Venice. She's also an art critic, journalist, and author based in New York. She made the wonderful 2008 film Louise Bourgeois, The Spider, the Mistress, and the Tangerine, which we screened here at the Hammer. And she also made another documentary profiling artists called Ilya and Amelia Kabakov, Enter Here, in 2013. Her writings published in the New York Times, Smithsonian Magazine, Vanity Fair, and Art in America, among many others, and she served as president of the International Association of Art Critics, USA Division, from 2000 to 2005. Amei will be in dialogue with art consultant and archivist Rani Singh. Rani's current work focuses on strategic planning and legacy management for artists and artist-endowed foundations. Previously, she worked as the director of special projects at Gagosian Gallery and for many years at the Getty Research Institute in modern and contemporary collections. She's also the director of the Harry Smith Archives and co-curator of the exhibition Fragments of a Faith Forgotten, The Art of Harry Smith, which recently closed at the Whitney and which will open at the Carpenter Center at Harvard in July. She also recently completed a long-term project with the studio of Ed Ruscha and curated the Agnes Varda exhibition Desire to See at the Fahey Klein Gallery. So now please join me in welcoming the director of Taking Venice, Amei Wallach, and art historian Rani Singh.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Amei. It was really amazing to see. And there's been so many rumors about this story. So to see it finally on the screen is really a treat. So thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. It's great to be here.
I mean, what's interesting to me is that you really, it's a live one. Is that, you really captured this moment when the government was getting involved and the art world was shifting in such a provocative way, both stylistically and geographically.
Right. I mean, to me, this was an incredible moment, which really resonates with today, I have to say. It was a moment of enormous optimism and a feeling in the art world that you can do anything and it's going to be all right. And how sad that seems right now.
Well, it's hard not to see it through the lens of 2024, and it's very sobering, especially at the end when you see Rauschenberg so actively engaged in trying to get his message out and really spread the word and how powerful art can be.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a real change in Rauschenberg. It's interesting. Rob Storr in the film says that he doesn't think he was a political artist in the 50s, that he just wanted to show the times we live in. Rauschenberg said he wanted to show the times we live in. And I was at the Getty this afternoon and I saw the Sidney Felsen Gemini show, and there's a lot of Rauschenberg in there. I mean, Sidney Felsen said, Rauschenberg showed me how to live. And I always compare what would Rauschenberg have done, what would Bob have done, and there was a piece in that show. It was a collage drawing with writing on it, and one of the sayings was "Art is social." And Rauschenberg made that in the 70s. He made that after all the changes in the United States, and everything he'd experienced made him into an activist, where he came to believe that art is, in fact, social.
Well, and that's one of the most powerful things in the film because you really see this arc happen. You know, in 1964, there was a kind of a question whether or not, how engaged he was. I mean, as you say, he was dealing with his times, but, how political was he?
Right. I mean, once again, as Rob Storr says, just dealing with your own times was a political statement. The abstract expressionists, which were considered the first major movement that showed that we weren't just a cultural backwater, but are really a leader in art, was abstract expressionism, and that was expressing the inner life of the artist. And Rauschenberg was doing the exact opposite. He was expressing the times we live in by the objects we see and the things we see and how we see them and how we encounter them. He was trying to open our eyes to, in fact, the moment we're in. So that, in a way, that cannot help but be political because it is whatever is going on.
And I mentioned to you that I think of this film somewhat as a precursor to Serge Guilbeault's book, How New York Stole the Idea of Modern Art, which is really kind of the, starting out in the 30s, but really focused on the post-war period where New York was becoming the center of the art world and taking that away from Paris, which had been, really, as we see in the film, leading the art world for so many decades.
You know, that book, Serge Guilbeault's
Yeah.
book, How New York Stole the Idea of Modern Art, is in fact a pretty controversial book. Most of the people I know in my world feel it's totally debunked because it seems to indicate that the artists, the abstract expressionists in themselves were making this political statement. They weren't. Artists are artists and they're doing what they're doing. And even when they believe art is social, it's about making the art. How it's used, how Nelson Rockefeller and the MoMA and the government used it, is another thing. And, my film before this one was about Ilya and Amelia Kabakov. Ilya Kabakov grew up, he was born in the Ukraine in 1933 when Stalin was starving the Ukraine. Millions of people died. And he grew up in the Soviet Union. He became the center of Moscow Conceptualist, which was a very avant-garde movement that were not allowed to exhibit. I met him in 87 in the Soviet Union, and then in 88 he came to the U.S. and became the great Soviet-era artist from the West. And I can't remember why I brought that up.
Well, I mean, just the idea of, with Serge Guilbeault's book that.
Right. Um, the Soviet Union was not allowing people to do things, and the Soviet Union was, in fact, using art as a governmental tool, where in this country, the artists were doing what they wanted to do, and the government liked the idea that artists were doing what they wanted to do and that was what we had to give, that we had freedom, artists could do anything they wanted to do, and that was fine.
And now we are in a position where really the government, especially, I mean, other countries, it's quite different, but in the United States, government is much less involved, shall we say, in terms of, exporting art and the vision of art and really being engaged in how art is out into the world.
Yeah, I mean, it was really kind of wonderful to have that moment when the U.S. actually believed that art could change hearts and minds. It's very fragmented now. It really depends on the embassy and who's in the embassy, what's going to happen to bring out the idea of art. We do have a program of art in the embassies where we bring art to the embassies, but that's so much more limited than what we were trying to do at that time.
I mean, another thing that, this story is almost intrinsically hard to put onto film. That's what struck me, because there's been a handful of people who've spoken about this, but you've really did a wonderful job of, interviewing so many people. I mean, it's really key in all the people who you were able to talk to multiple times, and so many of them aren't with us, and also the archival material that you were able to tap into in those photographs. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about the impetus for the story and how you actually pulled it all together.
So, as an art critic, I always believe that art is part of the world and it's part of every part of the world. And I always like to tell stories that showed that. And so when I was looking for distribution for the Kabakov film, I talked to a producer and I said, well, do you have an idea for another film? And she said, I was at the 1964 Venice Biennale. And I remembered all those stories, and I thought, man, that is a story that brings it all together. It brings together what the artist does, and it brings together what the government does, and it brings together all the many ways in which art intersects with life. I went to an exhibit of Ugo Mulas photographs. And Ugo Mulas, in the film you see, he photographed those paintings being put in the boat when they were being taken to the Giardini. And I thought, man, I have a film, because those are such dramatic photos. And
they're all black and white.
And they're all black and white. And we started, I had two young women who just grew in the job and found we have 1,000 archival images, documents, bits of footage, 1,000. And they found I think 75% of the film is archival. And everything we found enriched the story more and surprised us more. For instance, those photographs of Rauschenberg when he was winning, and he's looking at Solomon with such, I don't know, but it's such negative emotions. They're so complicated and so negative. And that led us to how he changed and what was actually, that moment for him was not a moment of triumph. In a way it was. Everybody wants to win. But it was not a moment. It was a very, very fraught moment for him. But the thing with archival from the 1960s is that it is in black and white. And we were going to have a black and white film. So we had two ways not to have a black and white film. One of them was the art. And we made a point of showing as much of the art in color as we possibly could. And the other one was to do some recreations. So we did in 2019,
2017, when Mark Bradford.
Right, but not first with Mark Bradford. We filmed with Mark Bradford, but really I was going over in 2017 to do interviews. But we did get some color at that point. In 2019, though, we went back to do the recreations. And I did the boat recreations from Ugo Mulas photographs. And then we recreated what we had heard about Rauschenberg roller skating in St. Mark's Square. We got to film in St. Mark's Square at midnight. That was really good. And then we recreated Solomon looking for the space, and we found an old camera, just the right kind of old camera. But it was very important to get color in. And even when they win with Summer Space, the ballet, that's a ballet that goes back to 1958, and it's been done ever since 1958. So we just took one of the performances that was later and in color. But it seemed incredibly important to get color and also to get beautiful Venice in this film.
Which you do so eloquently. And that scene, it's almost like a spy thriller at that point when they're transporting the paintings through. I mean, the music is really propulsive and driving it along.
Yeah, I mean, the music, so I thought that, I really like art films that use a genre. I think that's very witty. To me, it is. I think it might not be to everyone, but I love the Maisel brothers films about Christo, the Wrapped Pont Neuf. They did like a rom-com, and Running Fence was like a cowboy movie. And so I decided it would be really fun to make a caper that would make this story enjoyable as a film, as a filmic thing that was happening rather than as a straight art narrative. And that's what the music became.
Yeah, well, I mean, I really commend you on that because it's a tough road to hoe. And was there a book? The woman Hiroko, she actually wrote a book on this story, and so was it the film kind of structured loosely around her book?
Well, no, I mean, in the beginning, I read every book there was to read, and I interviewed anybody who'd written a book. So Michael Kren is there. But Hiroko Ikegami, I was really lucky because she came to visit New York. I mean, she teaches in Japan. And so I was able to interview her. I also liked the fact that she was a woman and she was young because there were so many people in it who were not young and who were not women. But it's interesting. The only person who picked it up was Christopher Knight in his review that she had written a book called The Great Migrator. Robert Rauschenberg and the Rise of Global Art, something like that, or the globalism in art, a title like that. And she really had done chapter and verse, scene by scene, in the Venice Biennale. And so an awful lot of the things she said, nobody else knew to say, even though Calvin Tompkins was there. Thank God for Calvin Tompkins, who really is my narrator, because he was there and he saw everything. Christo saw everything from a different point of view with enormous amount of humor. I mean, I was tempted, you're tempted to tell so many stories when you're telling them, and we're already telling a lot of stories. But Christo had come from the other side of the Iron Curtain. He'd come from Romania, and he had that whole story to tell, and he had not been long out of Romania when he came to the Venice Biennale at the invitation of Leo Castelli.
Well, it's great to hear all those different perspectives. Had you met Rauschenberg, or were you able to speak with him? I mean, obviously, you started the project after he had passed away.
But I did know Rauschenberg, and the reason I did know Rauschenberg is there was a woman named Tanya Grossman who really started printmaking on the East Coast the way June Wayne did on the West Coast, and they're in very different ways. Her first prints were with Larry Rivers, Rauschenberg, and Jasper Johns. And her master printer was Bill Goldstone, and who was a huge supporter of the film because he said Bob would have wanted it. And Bill Goldstone's son, Brian, is here somewhere. So it all comes round. It all comes round. But I would go to ULAE and I would watch Rauschenberg work. I watched him work with the great Soviet poet Voznesensky. And I went to visit Rauschenberg in Captiva with Tanya. And that was probably very interesting. Another thing in the Gemini show that I saw this afternoon is Rauschenberg talks about how what the work he loved best was work he did in collaboration with other people, which is why he loved printmaking. He loved the dance. He loved anything where he could collaborate. So in Captiva, he would sleep quite late during the day, and then he would get up in the afternoon. The TV would always be on because he always was wanting these images from real life to be part of his world. Everybody would be in the kitchen cooking in this wonderful house, which was partially on the water. I wonder if it's safe now. And he would be part of the cooking as well. At midnight, we would sit down to eat. And then afterwards, everybody would go into the painting studio and watch him paint, kibitz with him. He would have this whole social thing around his work.
Well, and now the Rauschenberg Foundation is really, a very robust organization that sponsors a lot of artists to visit Captiva and go there for residency. And as you say, they had during those storms last year that it was totally devastated, but I believe they've been rebuilding it. But it's really an amazing organization. I know a lot of people who have been there and been able to, do their work unimpeded.
Right. I mean, there was quite a bit of devastation, but I don't know how much. I actually don't. But the thing is, Rauschenberg started that foundation, and he started it when he was really young and really poor. But he was the kind of guy who always wanted to help other artists.
No, that's amazing. It's incredible. And I also was going to mention there's a show here at the Hammer called Groove, and it's all prints from the Grunwald collection. And in it is a Cy Twombly portfolio that Tatiana Grossman and UAEL,
Universal Limited Art
yes,
Editions.
thank you, put together, which is really, and I recommend the exhibition because it's really outstanding.
And Twombly might have been Rauschenberg's first male lover. I don't know, but he and Twombly were lovers at Black Mountain, and then Rauschenberg went with him to Italy. And so, and Rauschenberg there met a lot of the Italian artists who influenced him, and he influenced them.
And then there's even a John Cage print there as well. So maybe we can open it up to questions. There's people who have the microphones, so maybe if you raise your hand, somebody will come at you. We're slightly blinded.
Thank you for a fascinating
Okay.
and very enlightening film. I had
over there, yeah,
one
sorry.
question. I'm over here.
Here, she's over there.
Where?
Right
Oh, over there. I'm looking in the wrong direction.
Over
Okay.
here.
I can't see a thing.
So you say that the Venice Biennale was the first time the government had participated in cultural management, but you also talked about just now the abstract expressionists, and there was a CIA program to promote Jackson Pollock very aggressively in the late 50s, and I think latterly Rauschenberg and Rothko were involved in that program. It's been written about extensively by Francis Stoner.
Right, it has, and once again, in the everybody I talked to in the art world debunks that the CIA was involved in this. I tried to talk everyone, all the authors I interviewed about how much the CIA was involved, and they all said we've searched everything, all the archives, we find no footprint. That doesn't mean there wasn't one. The film does not say this is the first time that the U.S. government was involved. The U.S. government did tour with the MoMA, did tour this amazing exhibition that also went to the Soviet Union of abstract painters. But the CIA was deeply involved. I can't remember the name of the organization, the European Council or something like that. But they were deeply involved in literature and music, but not in the visual arts so much. The visual arts did not seem as important in the U.S., and there were very many people in Congress who were totally against the visual arts because they thought it was full of communists. But the film doesn't say this is the first time that the U.S. government was involved. The U.S., every other nation, and many nations have a cultural ministry, which we certainly don't have anything on the cabinet level, but all the other nations built their own pavilions. The U.S. government didn't. I mean, it was a bunch of gallerists who built the pavilion. So there was a lot of joy in the fact that the government did want to get involved. And it was the USIA, the United States Information Agency, which was our PR propaganda arm, not the CIA, which is the espionage arm.
Well, that's how I interpret it, was much more overt involvement.
Hi, my name is Matthew Asada, and I'm actually a cultural diplomat with the State Department.
Oh, good.
And I really appreciate your film, both from the art history as well as the cultural diplomacy and the contemporary angle. And I teach right now at USC, I teach cultural diplomacy at the Annenberg School. But my question is, when you looked into the story, you have interviewing from the more recent biennales that took place. I was curious if you were able to talk to anyone from the State Department about the current approach to art diplomacy and how we kind of use whether it's the visual arts or others in our engagements overseas. So just kind of curious about like your work today or any engagement you had with the department itself.
You know, we kept on trying to find diplomats to talk to us who are working today, and we didn't. I mean, we failed, I have to say. I in my own experience, I'm on the board of a smaller organization called CEC Arts Link, which we do international exchanges. And I know that there's some embassies that are deeply involved and some that aren't. But why don't I ask you? You're here, and I can ask you, what is the diplomatic involvement of the United States?
So thank you for the question. I'll say this is that one of the things that I specialize in are actually the big events, actually like the World's Fair. So my last assignment before going to USC was to lead the US Pavilion at the World's Fair in Dubai. And so if you go back into the cultural history is that in 1958 in Brussels at the USA Pavilion, which was led by the State Department, there actually was a display of art, but that was actually curated by MoMA. And so I
Right,
think
exactly, yeah.
today it's a little bit unfortunate, but the State Department provides a grant. It's a tenth of the cost of the Venice Biennale. So again, that funding that was there in '64, which is probably like 100% or something like that, is now only about 10%. But I would say that what I've focused on the World's Fair, the next one is in Osaka, and I'm proud to say that the U.S. government, Congress, is actually funding that exhibition in that pavilion. And it's the first time that the Congress has ever funded a pavilion since the end of the Cold War. So we are trying to make some efforts to restore some funding for these cultural exchanges and artistic exchanges.
My understanding is that with the end of the Cold War, I think 1999, the USIA was totally disbanded, and that there really is no central organization like that to organize these things. Am I wrong about that? Oh, there you are. Right.
The State Department assumed all the responsibilities for U.S. Information Agency, so it's not an independent agency anymore, but the bureau still exists. They still run some of these programs, and it is pretty robust. I mean, here in LA, we have one that Secretary Blinken launched on music diplomacy with the Grammy Museum recently, but it's not as well resourced as it was back during the Cold War, and that's just across the board.
Right. Thank you. It's really helpful for you to be here.
I must disagree, and really directly. I think it's a narrow read of the situation, because if you look at the history of the Cold War from '50s and the '50s and the '60s, and what Encounter, the relationship between Encounter magazine, relationship between all of the arts organizations were out of Europe, that basically all of them were front organizations for CIA during this period. And if you look at the archives, the U.S. archives, that have been have recently been released in terms of this, it's all over the place about exactly how this was manipulated at the very highest level at this time. Maybe not so successfully in the art world, but in every other area of political and cultural standing. So if you look at the history of the Cold War in the context of art, sure, you might get that point of view. But if you look at the history of the other CIA, not the CIA, not the USIA, but you look at the CIA and the others, you'll find that to be a very different story.
Well, as I mentioned, the CIA was very involved at Paris Review, and they were very involved in literature, and they were very involved, somewhat more involved in music, but they were not involved in the visual arts because they didn't care enough, didn't think it was important enough.
It's a broader issue as well.
There's somebody wants to answer way over there. Oh.
Thank you. The movie was absolutely amazing. There's one thing that I picked up on. You mentioned in one scene that the artists who represented the states have to be cleared. because it was politically an important event. So my question is, with Rauschenberg being gay and coming out from the McCarthy era and the prosecution, which was as intense on homosexuals as it was on communists, was his sexuality ever an issue for him representing the states in this particular event?
Let me tell you how hard it was for me to get somebody to say he was homosexual. Because Jasper Johns and Rauschenberg both were very, very reticent about it. They never spoke about it, and to the point where everybody respected that, because they did come out of an era when it was dangerous to be a homosexual, and it was very fraught. Although they did live in, as Louis Menand says, they did live in a milieu where there were many other homosexuals. There was a community, but it was a very dangerous, fraught situation, and to the end of their lives, they were very, very careful about it. I asked Jasper, I was so thrilled to get an interview with Jasper I could record, because he does not do that. But I asked him if he wanted to talk about it, and he said no. But on the other hand, he gave an incredibly intimate interview. The first time I saw anything in public about, there have been writers who wrote about the gay angle. In fact, there have been writers who insist that monogram, the goat with the
Yes,
tire,
absolutely.
is a sexual symbol. And Rauschenberg was asked about that, and he was asked about it at the Metropolitan Museum on stage, and he said, well, if people think that way, I don't see how they can cross the street because there's so many tires. But that's typical Rauschenberg. But the first time I saw it in public was one of the wall texts about Jasper Johns described their relationship as the relationship of lovers, and that this responded to their relationship. And Calvin Tompkins was the only person who talked about, the dynamism of that they were lovers, and the dynamism. And I said to him, "Oh, Calvin, thank God you were the only one who said that." He said, "I am? I don't want to say it." So finally I got Louis Menand to say it. But they were so careful about it themselves that everyone else respected that. It was a different, and Mark Bradford, I think I put this, so there's going to be a DVD coming out, believe it or not, in this day and age, a DVD coming out. But there are a lot of extras on it, and one of them are a much longer interview with Mark Bradford. Gave me a fabulous interview. But he said about, Rauschenberg, he was a person of his time. That's what you had to do in that time.
I think we have time for one more question.
I wanted to ask you about the Venice Biennale itself and how it's changed in recent years. You had Simone Lee in your film, who I think has a show at LACMA, the Pavilion show's opening this week as well. And what I was struck by was, in recent years that I've gone, countries have handed over their pavilions often to artists who are from other countries. And so this is a big question, but the question of the Venice Biennale also feels like such a different institution, and it's such a different kind of reflection of art today. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that, because it also seems like mentioning the US government's role and potential roles feels very out of sync with how the Venice Biennale actually is such a global and international and transnational event today.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, and I think in many ways, this Biennale broke the ice that a nation that wasn't a European nation could win. And it took a little while, but it's become incredibly global. In fact, I think there is no center of art making. There are marketing centers, but no center of art making. And that's totally reflected in the Biennale, which, by the way, is all over town. If you want to go to the Biennale, you need a long time, because you don't just go to the Giardini. You go all over town. And nations that have never had pavilions before suddenly have pavilions. Once again, they invite people from other nations to be part of their pavilions. It's very much a reflection of the world we live in, just as that one was very much a reflection of the world we lived in then.
Well, and even the theme this year of Stranieri, which is strangers, there's strangers everywhere, and really the idea of we're all strangers and bringing everybody together.
Yeah, totally.
But I want to really, I thank you for bringing us together for this, and also mention that the film is opening tomorrow at the Lemley Royal and at Encino for 1 week run. So please tell your friends, and tomorrow night you will be there doing the Q&A as well.
I'll be at the Lamley Royal, and tomorrow doing a Q&A. Tell your friends we need audiences. So we had a wonderful opening weekend last weekend in New York, to the point where we were held over. But I have been warned that in LA, because the distances are so great and the traffic is so terrible, I'm going to have terrible audiences. This is not one. Thank you for coming.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Oh, and please join us afterwards for a drink if you would like. At Lulu.